Hi, I'm Dustin Urban, and welcome to the Turning Point Summit, which is all about aligning with soul and embracing your purpose in these pivotal times. I'm honored to welcome as my guest today, Michael Stone. Michael is the host and producer of the Shamanism Global Summit and KVMR's Conversations, which interviews leading-edge thinkers, authors, and activists in the areas of environmental restoration, social justice, and spiritual fulfillment. He is the founder of Mastery of Management International, a global organizational development consulting firm whose purpose is to bring heart and meaning into the world of work. Michael also leads classes, teleseminars, and workshops on embodied shamanism, moving meditation, and spiritual fulfillment. He teaches to tens of thousands online and is on the faculty of the Shift Network. Michael, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure, Dustin. It's good to be with you.
Great. Yeah, I'm just, I'm excited to have you on. I think your perspective is, I love a shamanic perspective in general. I've got a number of experts that bring that, but, you write that, we're in an evolutionary unfolding and that true societal and global change will arise from inner transformation. And, I really, just resonate with that. And that's how I've come into my work is just, it all starts at the level of individual, work and growth. And so thank you for doing the work you are in the world.
You're welcome.
So I'd love to start by, you had a successful career in the corporate world. And I'd love to hear a little about what kind of your turning point was, what brought about your shift to this work in shamanism.
Well, it's been a long road, 72 years almost. So, I've had a lot of shifts over that time. I spent over 30 years in the corporate world. As you said, I had a consulting firm, spent half my time in Europe and half my time in North America. And I think one of the major turning points in my life was meeting Gabrielle Roth, who is the person who started the Five Rhythms movement. And the Five Rhythms are a cosmology of energetic states, embodied energetic states. And each of the rhythms relates to different relationships we have with energy. Mm-hmm. So it's really about healing. Gabrielle used to say, if you want to heal the psyche, you put the body in motion. And each of those rhythms flowing is about our feminine energy of receiving, and staccato is the energy of self-expression. Chaos is when the masculine and feminine come together and you have upheaval, kind of like our current world situation. It's about dissolving contradictions. Lyrical is about lightening up and enjoying life, and then stillness is really about going inward into the soul's journey. And so, I was already deeply into the corporate world. I was marketing director for Computerland and the earlier company, MSI Computers. And then I met Gabrielle. I walked into a room and I heard this weird music and went through these banners of silk, and all of a sudden I was dancing, and this is really weird, but I feel so at home. And, prior to that, I had been pretty disembodied. I came from, a lot of early abuse and trauma and a lot of major deaths in my life, including my mother's suicide and many other deaths. So, and a military background. So I was pretty disembodied. I had someone Rolfing in those days. Ida Rolf was very big. And after about 3 sessions, he said, Michael, you're the only person I've ever worked on that doesn't realize he has a body. and I really, so when I met Gabrielle, I was pretty disembodied. And, Gabrielle was called the urban shaman. I didn't realize for the first 10 years that I worked with her, so that started in 1974, that I was actually doing a shamanic practice of embodied, what I became known for is embodied shamanism, by bringing the two fields more closely together. And many people know me as the person who started the embodied shamanism movement.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a huge turning point for me. I think another one around that time was the S training, when I realized that I was responsible for my own life, that nobody was going to come and take care of me. And those were two huge turning points. But my work was always about heart and meaning. Wounded healers are maybe the best kinds of healers, because that crack in the heart, the broken heart, is often the place that is longing to find wholeness. And so, we go on a path with our wounding to heal it, and we realize that our healing our own heart is healing the world, and the healing of the world is it's really important that we find our true soul's journey and find meaning. So my company, Mastery of Management International, was the motto was bringing heart and meaning into the workplace. I think you mentioned that earlier. And that was always my work in the corporate world. I was classically trained in organizational development, did postgraduate work in organizational systems, and a lot of work in cross-cultural, worked with the European Union, large organizations like Microsoft and AT&T, and set up programs for them in coaching and connecting. Got a little weird when I started bringing movement into the organizational setting, because that was really weird for people. They did a couple martinis before they could actually do that. And what I discovered more and more, that most of the people I worked with in organizations were much like me. They were very in their head and very disembodied. And so over a 30-year period, I got more and more out of my vocation and more into my avocation, and merging those areas. And so shamanism continued to be a more important aspect. And as we got into the 90s and early 2000s, I was more and more frustrated with what would happen when I worked with people and being more authentic, and then they would do that and be laid off for speaking their truth. And I've always been a seeker of truth. So my work basically started as a journey from the head to the heart. And how do we drop into our body and recognize that we have this immense cellular network of information, ancestral information, as well as contemporary information, to be able to read situations in a way that your head can never read. And of course, bringing that into shamanism then with journeying. And most of the journey work I do is not like what's called core shamanism these days. It's not somebody beating on a drum while you lay on the floor and do a journey. I do that sometimes. But I tend to get people up moving, and I work a lot with the elements and the teachings of the elements and how they relate to us, since we're basically made up of the elements. And so the first element of my teaching, the first part of my teaching, is really to drop out of the head and into the body and begin to sense and open up the instinct and the intuition, and to be able to move in the world in an embodied way. There's a great quote, James Joyce, I've forgotten which the name of the person, but he said, "Mr. So-and-so lives a short distance from his body." And my experience is still in the corporate world when I go in, that I used to jokingly say I work with heads on sticks. The only reason they have a body is to carry their head to the meeting. But they miss out in the corporate world on this vast, I'm a $500 an hour consultant in the corporate world. And I tell people, if you practice this work, you'll have a whole team of $500 an hour consultants. You won't have to pay anything because they live inside your skin. You can just tap into this whole body of non-ordinary reality characters that we all have in our psyche and that we can tap into to get information, to get creativity, to learn how to solve difficult problems that have never been solved before. I worked with an industrial light and magic for a while, and 70% of everything they did had never been done before. So, to bring real creativity and to tap into that deep cellular wisdom. So that was the basis of my work. In doing that, I also worked a lot in the area of story as a both dancer and a meditator. I began to realize that we live in a story, and that people have heard that before. That's no big deal. But we think we are the story,
right?
And we don't even think that. We think from that. Actually, we think from the place that, this is who I am.
Totally identified with it.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's no freedom. So as a meditator and as a dancer and as a shamanic practitioner, you really get to see, you're the witness of the story. You don't have to be a spear carrier in someone else's opera. You actually can be the author of your story. And for the most part, we're constantly being fed from issues from the past, which has a lot to do with soul remembering and soul retrieval and regaining our basic essence. But in order to do that, you really have to transform the story, and then you have to embed the new way of being in the body. Mm. So those were two important parts. One is to move from the head to the heart and to the whole body, and recognize the power of being embodied. The second is to really not only recognize that we live in a story, but how to access that story in such a way that we actually can redefine our entire past. Mm. So many people, I had a very challenging childhood, and I was at one point a victim of that. And when I recognized, I'm actually not a victim, not only that, I can go back and reinterpret my entire past as a hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell, who I studied with, used to say, the hero's journey, you can redefine your past. And so that became a big part of my work, was, redefining the story. And a lot of the work I've done for a long time has been helping people to redefine their story so they can tap into their soul story. I forgot what you called it in the introduction, but really to tap into our gifts and strengths and talents that are mostly buried inside of our story. And which is pretty important at this particular time in the world. We can talk more about that. Then I found another issue, and I've been working on that issue for a few years now. It was actually clear to me for a long time, but I didn't know how to access that. And that is that when we start to redefine, to reauthor our story in a new way, we come up against a problem, because we don't live in a solo universe. We live in a community field. We live in a global consciousness. We live in a familial consciousness, which is always impacting our story. A good analogy would be if you work with a drug addict, someone who's been a heavy user for a long time, and they go into rehab for, say, 30 or 45 days, and they're clean and sober, and they're doing really well, and they get their health a little bit back, and their strength of character, and their vision of what could be in their life. And they get out and they go back and they have the same friends, the same community. And so it's very predictable. I don't remember what the percentages are, that someone who goes back into their community after rehab almost certainly is going to go back to using in a very short time.
Yeah.
So you have to either change your community field or find a way to access and have your community field reinterpret who you are. Another metaphor for that is that let's say you go home for Christmas or Thanksgiving and you're running a company and you're a successful 50 or 60-year-old executive, making $500,000 a year, and you go home to your parents for Thanksgiving, and all of a sudden you're 5 and your mother's telling you what you should do and your father's telling you you're not doing it right, and your brothers and sisters are throwing peas at you or whatever. You're just suddenly pulled back into that story. So a big question that has been on my mind for many years is, well, how then can I access the community field? And that's been a big part of my work in developing. I'm doing some developmental courses around that, but that's been a really big aspect is, instead of my looking out to the field, how can I embrace the way the field looks in at me and then begin to alter the way that they interact with me? And so those are the 3 key elements of the work that I do today at this point in my life. Who knows? It could change anytime.
Yeah.
So that's what, the basis of the work that I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. I love that image of walking through the silks and suddenly finding yourself moving.
It was brilliant. It was actually one of the experiences, and it's funny, I became very close with Gabrielle and was close to her up until the day she died 3 years ago, and I told her about that story, and she remembered it exactly because she said she remembered every dance she ever did over 50 years of dancing, right?
Wow.
And so she was pretty present and really a channel of, she just channeled. Things came through her. There was no effort to anything and very little planning to anything she did. She was really tuned into that cellular wisdom. But, to hear that strange music, and then Martha, who worked for her for years, put these silk banners. So you got all tangled up in them when you were coming into the room, and then you got spit out into this strange music in this darkened hotel ballroom kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And it was, and I've had that with a lot of people, not all people, but a lot of people that go into a 5 rhythms or a soul motion or a moving meditation kind of room. And I've taught both of those and have been practicing for a long time, that they have the experience of I'm home. And often it's the people who like to say, I don't dance.
Right.
Because it's a meditation. And being one of these wiggly, squirmy guys, type A people all my life, dance is how I find my earth and my grounding and get centered through moving the body. It's much, I'm a meditator too, but it's much faster for me to be embodied by moving my body with awareness. And that's that whole practice. So I even do that with people in my online classes, that I have people get up and move in the journeys that we do.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I find that too. Meditation is never, of course I probably should and could get much better at meditating on a pillow, but I've always been, an athlete, and it's, moving, especially in the outdoors. It's just total reset for my system, briefly.
That you're making in the outdoors, because one of the issues that I think is crucial is that we live inside of a myth of separation. Mm-hmm. And that's the story that we live in. One of the cultural stories is that we're separate. We're separate from our bodies. We're separate from each other. We're separate from the world. And we're separate from nature. And so there's enormous soul loss around that. When I say soul loss, I mean loss of essence. Yeah. We're losing so many species of animals and plants every day, and we've become numb to that. But it's not something, we're in a field that's completely connected. And so one of the aspects of becoming embodied is to reconnect with the web of life and nature. And, even if you live in New York City, there are places to go, well, Central Park, but there are other places to go to just connect with the natural world.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting. You're drawing a connection between reconnecting with the body and reconnecting with the earth. It seems to be parallel processes. I wonder if you could briefly give us a little more of a sense of how you work, by maybe talking about, let's say a client comes to you and they're really, they're like one of my viewers. I know I'm here to do something important. I have a sense of what it is. I really don't know what, clearly exactly what it is though. And I'm in a dead end job, et cetera, et cetera. Can you help me tune into, why am I really here? What is my essential nature and purpose? Can you just maybe talk a little about how you'd work with them in an embodied way, maybe work with their narrative piece, and also this collective field component to help them tune into that?
Yeah, that's great. Great question, Dustin. So, I coach thousands of people all over the world in different cultures, mostly, Western cultures, but at the same time, there's, it's interesting to me that this search for what my purpose is often at the heart of not finding your purpose. Because your purpose is whatever you're doing right now, is tapping into your own truth. So people are looking for a grand vision, a place to get to, whereas purpose, soul purpose, our core purpose, is about being here in the present. It's not a destination, it's a place to come from. I think there's a lot of mischief in some of the work that's being done around that somehow I'm going to discover my purpose. Your purpose was never lost. It's just buried.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Well, you get in your body, and you drop down into your heart, and you begin to recognize what's true and what's not true, and then act on that. So, if something is true and I'm in my body, then I can feel it. My heart is open. I feel lighter, when I tell the truth about something. Not when I think of what I have to get rid of in order to do the something that I know I have to do. Like you mentioned, people are in dead-end jobs. People, they all have, there's a story about that, survival story. Oh, I have a family, I have children, I have to work at this job. But when I retire, there was an executive who had a couple kids, and he was the head of a company, and he kept telling his wife, he turned 50, and his wife says, "Why don't you retire? We've got enough money, and we can, we don't need this, and you can stay home with the family." And I will do that. I really want to do that as soon as, I can't leave the company now. The company would fall apart without me. And this went on for a number of years, through his 50s, and it was constantly, well, there's nobody that can do this job but me. I'm the only person that can run this particular company, part of a large conglomerate. So finally, he got to 57, I think, somewhere around there, and he said, "Okay, next year I'm going to do that." And right after that, he dropped dead of a heart attack. And guess how long it took them to replace him in that company? 48 hours. They had a new CEO, and the company was doing just fine. So we tell ourselves these stories, and we get stuck inside of these stories. And so that's a huge thing. So when I'm working with someone, it's really to get to the truth, and the truth often lives inside of what breaks your heart.
Mm.
You know, I have a friend, Andrew Harvey, who is passionate about animals, and he doesn't really work in the animal area, but he's really upset, and it breaks his heart to see what's happening to the animals in the world.
Yeah.
And he uses that to become a passionate advocate of spiritual growth, but he's really informed by what breaks his heart.
Mm.
And it's really to go to that place in us that that is, it's always been there. It's always been that way. And in that place, then you discover your natural, authentic gifts and strengths and talents to do what you have to do.
Mm.
So when I'm working with a client or something like that, the first thing is dropping into the body. The second thing is really to get at the stories that they live inside of,
Mm-hmm.
and that are dysfunctional stories that drain their essence, that drain their energy. We take enormous amount of energy to suppress our true self, and we put on a face to meet the faces that we meet, as T.S. Eliot said, and we are just inauthentic. We're not being authentic. And who are the people that you're really inspired by? They're the anti-Mames of the world, the people who are totally authentic about their inauthenticity. Isn't it inspiring when somebody tells you, gee, I've been living this way, and I've been hiding this, and all of a sudden, I'm coming out of the closet, or whatever metaphor you use for that, or real experience of that. And there's a freedom in that.
Mm.
And the challenge is to step into the fear instead of continually getting smaller by the fear. And we live in a culture now that, the end of the world as we know it, end of the life on this planet, is a real possibility. And that's people are letting that drive them crazy instead of using that as an opportunity to open to something bigger.
Yeah.
Everything has beginnings, middles, and endings. And the threat of an ending of human civilization ought to be really motivating people to wake up.
Yeah.
And so many people are sticking their head in the sand or complaining, which, complaining about things they can't do anything about, and not taking action on things they can do that. But to get to that place, you really need to unravel your story. You really need to see, soul loss, people make it kind of a mystical thing. Soul loss is nothing more than dissociation from trauma. No one that is a child, and I assume that most people that are listening to this were a child at some point. There's no one, some of us were born as adults, but there's no one that didn't have critical times. It doesn't matter. In fact, it isn't even much different whether it was someone yelled at them, or they were raped or molested as a child, or some really critical car accident or some accident. What we do in traumas in those early years, mostly before 6 or 7 years old, is we have to respond in a way that protects our vulnerable psyche at that time.
Yeah.
And so we do that by suppressing a part of our essence, suppressing our joy, suppressing our relationship to money or to men or to women or our creativity. Those are our essential gifts that we have. And if we don't deconstruct that story and actually get at the source of that. You don't have to actually get to the source of it, just to get to the debilitating conversations and to recognize that it's a pattern that we've been living out. So you could say we live constantly into our past because we've created these ways of being and expressed, which takes enormous energy.
Yeah, it does.
Which is at the heart of a lot of the suffering. This whole myth of separation gets created out of these early traumas. It's not something to fix, it's something to bless and honor those traumas. But the patterns that we created, they were totally appropriate when you're 3 or 5 or 6. Totally appropriate to protect your vulnerable psyche, to recognize you're not getting the love you needed or the attention you needed or all of those different aspects or the protection that you actually needed at that time. But to be doing those same patterns at 40 or 50 or 60 is it's craziness, basically. So working with somebody that's been through that is really to get them to, what I've learned as a teacher for 50 years is that people don't learn from information. Not that information isn't great. I'm always developing myself and looking at information, but people learn through experience. And so people need to experience the impact of their debilitating conversations and how they get stopped in those conversations so that they can actually make a choice and recognize that there's a payoff and a cost for every single thing that we do, everything that we do. And the world that we live in, for the most part, is the one that comes out of our mouth. So if we're always talking about how bad the government is, and we're not going to make a whole big difference. If we're talking about how scarce money is, or love is, or how hard it is to find a good man or a good woman, we're just perpetuating those early traumas and the way that we protected ourselves at that time. And then, as I said earlier, the trick then, once you learn that, is to reauthor that and recognize, the fact that I had a lot of childhood trauma. When I look at it and I go, Jesus, I survived that. I must be here for something more than complaining about it. I survived pretty amazing traumas in my life. And that's not to pat myself on the back. That's to say that anybody can do that regardless of how bad the trauma was. And so you reauthor that story and then you get it embedded in your cellular memory, which is an important aspect of it. You just can't promise it away or those kinds of things, right?
So it's not just intellectual insight. You're actually using practices to kind of ground that new story in the body. Is that right?
Exactly. And so it's a constant thing. It's and you begin to react to the new story and look for evidence of that. So you have to ground it in evidence, and it's kind of like, let's say I'm going to buy a Mercedes-Benz, right? And I've been looking at the new, whatever it is, 500 series Mercedes. And I really want to buy that car. I think I'm going to buy that car. And you decide that, and you sit down at the table, and you're looking through the brochures. And the next day, you go out. Now, you look around on the freeway, and everybody's driving Mercedes all of a sudden. Where do these people get all the money to buy all these Mercedes? They're everywhere.
Right.
Because that's what I'm scanning for.
Yeah.
If you want to have a miraculous life, scan for the miracles. It's really that simple. But it takes vigilance, to do that. And I really recommend people have a coach, not someone who has a lot of information to tell you what to do, but to reflect back to you what you're saying and how you're creating a world that keeps you stuck in your old patterns.
Yeah.
So, I've had coaches for years. I pay a lot of money to people to keep me true in who I say I am and what I'm up to. And I think it's really a powerful thing that people have people like that.
Certainly.
But then the third aspect of that, to go back to the basic cosmology that I'm talking about, is, well, yeah, but then how do I alter the scene at my workplace, say? Because they know me to be someone who complains about the government, or they know me to be someone who is in an unhappy marriage, or they know me to never have any money. Well, that then is the job that you need to do, is you need to provide evidence to them that you're not that person anymore. You need to start changing your conversation with them that you're having. You need to not go into agreement when they're in their place, that we relate in our neuroses. We say, oh, my back is bothering me today. And especially old people say, God, I had to take 3 pills today. Stop it.
Yeah.
Just stop it. So then we get people to reimagine a new way of being. And the thing I said earlier, the most inspiring way to do that is to begin to be authentic about your inauthenticity. And we all are inauthentic. We all have things that are arising within us that we don't accept. And when we don't accept those things, they become deep patterns in us, and we have to be inauthentic. We look like you start to work for a company and you don't know anything, but you try to act like you know all about it, and you wonder why you fail. No, you don't get any help because you think you're supposed to know it. Well, how are you going to know something that you're just starting? I had this problem with MBAs in one of the companies that I was formulated and helped start, and they all came in, and they thought they should know everything because they have an MBA, but they didn't. And it was really hard to get them out of that, I'm a Stanford MBA, no.
Yeah.
No, you're a human being who has all these kinds of things. So really working with the story is such an important aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're in a time right now where there's people are really in a lot of fear and really overwhelmed with all the political, the economic, the social unrest, the ISIS, the war, the new president, all of these things. And there's an amazing amount of fear, an amazing amount of overwhelm. People, I'm sure you can relate to that. People are so busy with so much.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at the subject of overwhelm and you think about it, overwhelm is like a gusher. It's like, oil coming out of the ground, or water, or, it's not a bad thing. It's a sign, though, that I have a friend that has this great definition of overwhelm, actually. Her name is Sean Behrman, and she says, overwhelm is the opportunity to recognize that your identity cannot be with the level of personal or professional expansion that you're currently experiencing. Isn't that a great definition?
Yeah.
So it's saying, like, my story isn't big enough to hold all that's coming.
Interesting.
I need a bigger story to hold it up. Well, what about holding a soul journey? What about actually looking at, the gift that your own soul parts, the gifts that you came into life, and focusing on developing and opening to these beautiful, beautiful gifts that you have, that, we look and we say, oh, okay, Yeah, I mean, if you're a human being, you're going to get overwhelmed. It's inevitable. There's always some upset of something waiting around the corner that's going to knock me off my feet.
Mm-hmm.
And the real question is, how can I powerfully respond to that? How do, in the face of overwhelm that's coming, that's an automatic part of being human, you can't avoid it.
Yeah.
So how will I meet it in my life?
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing is to recognize that every time you're in overwhelm, it's giving you a really clear message. It's pointing to the gaps in your own development as a human being, as a soul being here on this planet at this time, with huge threats that are such a great glaring opportunity to develop ourselves. It's like, wake up,
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's not necessarily about, some real practical, well, you need to be doing less. It's actually an invitation to reframe the story you're living in, that, like you say, your current identity isn't big enough for what you're being called to, or what we're being called to collectively.
Exactly. And so, overwhelm is almost always caused by a massive amount of action that you've already taken and set things in place. You're the one that decided to do all these different things. You're just the one that decided to own the big house. You're the one that decided to have 6 kids. Whatever it is, you've taken action. You may have enjoyed that action, but now you got to deal with the consequences of, I got to feed these 6 kids or whatever.
Right.
So in each case, there's a payoff. Whenever you're in overwhelm, you're getting a payoff. And in the current state of being overwhelmed, the payoff is bigger than anything else. So you've got to, what happens is, instead of avoiding it, you've got to open to that, actually. And that's where, again, the reauthoring of the story, you discover those debilitating conversations, you reauthor the story to be consistent with the new level of expansion that you're stepping into. See, I mean, mostly people are just not responsible for how powerful they are in the face of transforming their overwhelm. So overwhelm is actually a really good thing. It's awesome because it indicates you're growing, you're expanding. You need to replace the old way of being with something new that allows you to be more expanded. And you need to honor it in every area of your life. So, nice. You have to stop the action. You have to restore integrity to all those places you said you were going to do something and not, and handle, I may have to quit my job. Okay. I may not know what I'm going to do. Okay. Well, you're going to have to figure all that out. You have to get your integrity. You have to support those 6 kids. You have to, make sure that you leave. The company doesn't crumble because you leave, although probably wouldn't, but depending on your position. You want to get into your body. So you have overwhelm, you recognize it, you name it, you see, what it's opening to. You begin to alter the story and create a new, more empowering story. And then the awesome part is that you share the breakthrough. Oh my God, I had this breakdown. I was overwhelmed and it was too much for me. And then I realized this thing. And then I stepped out of this old way of being and I stepped into this new thing. And you share that with people authentically, truthfully, about what it took for you to do that. Well, what happens? Number one, it inspires them that they can change their life. But number two, it embeds your new way of being in the listening field of your community.
Right.
So that's the journey and the way that I recommend, and work with people to get them that. And it's not always easy because we're very attached to our story.
Yes.
Our identity, we think, like I said earlier, we think our identity. It's kind of like if I thought I was my hand. I have a hand, but I'm not my hand. And our identity, we have an identity, yeah. But ultimately, and again, when you get into movement, you realize, no, we're just energy. That's the beauty of being on a 5 rhythms dance floor, is that you meet people not as personality, but as energy.
Yeah.
And it's really powerful.
Nice.
And when you get that, you can meet people everywhere as energy. I love that. And just love that. The way people are, just the way they are. And the way you are starts with loving how you are and allowing whatever arises to be your truth in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So to get back to the very beginning of what you said, about looking for your purpose is to get real and express your authentic self to the world. And you don't have to worry about what your purpose in life is, because if you're being real, you are living your purpose.
Yeah, and following the messages of the body and the heart. This is I'm looking at this in a new way lately, and I love that you're talking about it. This idea that we actually have an embodied intelligence, and the idea of being able to follow that through life instead of trying to think my way through it, which is exhausting and doesn't really work. That's a beautiful thing. And the other thing I hear with what you're saying of the overwhelm, it's like overwhelm is almost by definition this story, I can't handle this. Mm-hmm. And it's like a reframe, a reauthoring of one's identity. Well, I'm this, I can handle this because I'm this kind of a person, Yeah. So you have a program coming up that's all about dancing with overwhelm, and you're offering something to my viewers about that. You want to tell us a little about it?
Oh, let's see. Let me find my calendar. It's kind of a crazy life these days. But yes, I am doing a couple things. I'm doing a new moon call, which I do every month. And if people want to get onto that, they should just call support at Well of Light, WELLOFLIGHT. That's welloflight.com, support at welloflight.com. And they can get on the new moon and my monthly newsletter. And that's really a good thing to do, because every month I write a newsletter. I have for many, many years, and usually inspiring. And I have other inspiring things in there from other people too. So the Well of Light is the newsletter, and that's the website. What you're referring to is the webinar that I'm doing, the master class, and you can look at the URL there and click on that.
Yeah, there'll be a link right below this video here.
Yeah, and that's going to be an in-depth. I love the webinars when I do them. They're free. I offer them to people. I usually offer them when I have a new class coming up, and I do have a new class coming up next month called Living Effortlessly. So that's coming up. But the webinar is a free event. It's a couple hours. I think it's 5 o'clock. You can click on it and find out and sign up for it. 5 o'clock Pacific time, 8 o'clock Eastern time. And it's an opportunity. We have a global community. We've had, I think the last webinar, we had over 6,000 people from around the world.
Wow.
So it's really great. And then I do a Q&A at the end and actually do some work with people there. And I usually have some journeys that people can do. So it's a global community, and the New Moon monthly events are also that way. They're not quite as huge as the webinars, but both of those would be really, really useful and deepen the conversation. And I'm really grateful to you for the work you're doing and helping people get connected. We need alliances and these kinds of connections now. So
absolutely,
doing this, Dustin.
Yeah, so thank you, Michael. It's it's an honor to be hosting all these wonderful guests, yourself included, and giving people just a whole menu of really rich opportunities to work with people like yourself. So I definitely encourage, if you're watching, look for the link right under this video, and that'll be a great way to get linked up to go deeper with Michael and the great work you're doing. So.
Awesome.
Well,
Yeah.
Michael, this is great. I know we could just continue. There's so much richness to explore, but we're about out of time. So thank you so much for being here.
Many blessings. Thanks so much.
Many blessings to you.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. Be sure to look out for tomorrow's interview and watch your inbox. And we'll see you next time.